business case for service excellence is all about low-cost service excellence. So how do we make sure that we deliver a great service, but also at the same time take cost out of the organisation? How can we deliver that? And I guess that's part of the kind of things that I want us to look at today.
What this actually means in terms of value to the UK economy is, according to a recent Urban report, it's around about £15 billion a year. And clearly in today's market, we can't really afford to be leaving aside that money on the table.
You probably might be thinking, yeah, I saw the Virgin advert and I've heard the Harley Davidson before, so what? The so what is that all of your customers are exposed to these other businesses as well, and some businesses are doing some cool stuff out there, and that ups the expectation of your customers. And that takes me back to John Lennon, that you being very operational guys, as I was, you need to be able to put your sights up and think, what are we doing to respond to the Virgins and the Harley Davidsons and other people who are developing these great relationships with customers? Because your customers who might be interacting or seeing on TV even, those businesses, will have their expectations raised. And as I say, two things there. First of all, you've seen it before, but that's a subconscious awareness of this stuff. Are you consciously aware of it, and what are you doing in your business to respond to it? But also in acknowledgement of the fact that it's kind of hard to do that with the John Lennon stuff. So what is the right customer experience? That was kind of the title of this morning. For that, I go back to some other people who influenced my thinking a lot at John Lewis. Who guys you might have heard of, course, Shell Nordstrom and Jonas Ridderstrahl. Huge fan of their stuff. Wrote a book called Funky Business, which was very famous, and then another one which wasn't quite so famous but was just as good, called Karaoke Capitalism. And they're economics professors from Stockholm University, and that sounds kind of boring. They're not boring. If you've ever seen them, they are far from boring. They're just brilliant. And they will look at economics, which is their main discipline, but also look at world demographics, social trends, all sort of basically do a bit of futurology around stuff, and say actually where do we think customer experience, customer service is going. And at the beginning of this millennium, they come up with a very simple conclusion. And what I love about those two, whilst their thinking is very deep and very wide, they can kind of trace it all down into something simple. And their conclusion in 2000 was, if you're going to succeed in any organisation over the next millennium, you need to do two things. You need to be sexy and fit. And that kind of did it for me, because I thought I can remember that. So what does that mean? Well, I think it means, for sexy, Apple. Phenomenal products. Fantastic, but John Lewis used to sell a lot of Apple stuff, but when you think about it, the iPhone or the iPod doesn't actually do anything that you can't buy from somewhere else. It's the design and the interface and the feel that business is so successful at, and I wish them lots of success. Interestingly, quite timely with the sad demise of Steve Jobs, they are nervous that they can keep that cutting edge the design going, because it is about design. It's not really about the technology significantly. They didn't invent MP3s, but they invented a fantastic vehicle on which people could listen to them. And it was about that cutting-edge design. So I think sexy is a good place to be, but I think it's a dangerous place to be. I wouldn't wish them any ill, but I did some work for Nokia in Helsinki, which was really cool last summer, over in their headquarters in Helsinki. You don't mention the Apple word when you're in the Nokia, because they get really twitchy about it. And that's kind of my point. And a friend of mine, cousin of mine, works for Motorola. And Lizzie has worked for them for about 15 years or so now. How many of you had one of those Motorola Razr flip phones 10, 12 years ago when they came out? Everybody had one, didn't they? I don't know whether you know the building. Motorola have got a fantastic head office down in the West Country. It's like a big aluminium tube on stilts. If you look it up on Google Images, it's an amazing building. It's won loads of awards. It's like this big corrugated aluminium tube on stilts. Lizzie was telling me a couple of years ago that building is only a third full and they're trying to sublet it. Why? Because it was commissioned when the Razr was at its height, and they never managed to recreate that in their subsequent designs. So that's my fear about thinking that your product or service is really sexy. It might be, but can you sustain it is the challenge. The other way to look at it is fit, and I use EasyJet for fit, simply because I use them a lot for business line. They've got such a low cost base, and they're on the news actually last week saying they've made more profit than any other airline in the UK. They've got such a low cost base, they can't afford to be inefficient. So they are ruthlessly effective, and that makes them quite reliable. But, and here's the but with fit, I was doing some work over in the Isle of Man for the Isle of Man government a couple of years back, and there was a route that I had to come from another client, which meant that on part of that leg I could use EasyJet or Flybe. Now, if Flybe suited my schedule better, I'd use Flybe. So my sort of little learn from that for myself was I love these people and I'll talk about them at conferences and say they're really efficient, but it's not driving loyalty, not real loyalty from me. They'll be my first choice and the first one I'll look at, but if they don't suit me, I won't wait the extra hour to get the EasyJet flight, I'll get a competitor's flight. So the fit is really important, but I would question as to how much it would drive loyalty.
Don't just complain about the way things are if they're not going well. But also, you've got to be able to say, what should you do better or what can you do better? At Eager, I introduced them, I was so sick of what we call the rain clouds. And we all have the poor employees, those people who just want to, kind of trip up on the tall stairs and just become a happy at my inner self coming out. But you have to deal with those people. And I got so fed up of hearing what I used to call the tea room Twitter. And I used to call them the rain clouds, because if you walked in, I'm going to be rude here, but if I walked into the tea room, everything they're like, it was pissing down in their life all the time. It was raining, and I was like, 5 minutes with you and I'm depressed as you are. So I've got to get out. If you ever walked into a room and you kind of try and do that, because you think, I don't want to see them, I'm quite happy today, and all of a sudden you're not, because they just drag you down to their level. I got to the point where I said, we're not even going to allow criticism in this organisation. And we got to a point, our culture changed because we used to challenge it, we used to give red cards, made it fun. But we said you can't criticise unless you've got a solution. And if you say, this is not working, you have to say, what I think you should do is. And that changed the culture, because absolutely, what someone was saying earlier, I think it was Andrew was saying, people who are, are often the biggest critics and the biggest cynics about what you're doing and kind of different things that you're trying to do. And they might have seen it all before. They actually do care about the organisation. So, actually, I do agree that you can change some of their mindsets. If you can't, then you take the leg from under them. But and actually, I think in terms of performance managing these people, it's tough love. It's mother love. It is really very tough, and it's kind, and it's respectful, but it's tough. You have to do that. But in an employee-owned organisation, you have the right to contribute, the responsibility to support the business and do the best you can, but also to share the pain when things don't go right. I'll give you one example, which I just imagine if this was in your organisation. 2 years before I left Eager, we were in the government space where 90% of our business was public sector. And that's a tough place to be right now. So our profits were reducing, we were looking at the sectors and the skill sets were changing, and we worked out if we didn't take a pay rise for the next 2 years, we could save 100 jobs. So we put it to our staff council. The staff council was these representatives that are elected. And the majority of people voted not to take a pay rise for 2 years to save jobs. And what other sector would you get that? And that is because you get a culture where it's the great over the many. And that comes over that came over 20 years. That doesn't happen overnight. That comes with the long, hard slog of an organisation that people fundamentally trust and believe that you're trying to do the very best that you can for them.